Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Humphreys, the lead rigger and technical artist at Glitch. This is Armin Huck, lighting and rendering lead. During this session, we'll be going over how to create linear content for YouTube and sharing some of the highlights we've learned during production. Before we get too far ahead, we'd like to share a little bit about who we are here at Glitch. Then we'll go over how we were able to achieve the cartoon styles expressions, followed by some of the takeaways on how we did our lighting, rendering, and addressing QA notes before concluding with a bit of Q&A. So, who is Glitch Productions? Well, we make cool stuff.
This is our home. And I will not discard you.
You blew up my sister, shot Lux, brainwashed my friends, and your hack is going to kill a whole bunch of innocent people!
Okay, wait. You did what now?
What are you on about? What are you people?
So, at Glitch, we're an indie animation studio on YouTube that creates animations for teens and young adults, with over 10 million subscribers and almost 1 billion collective views across our 5 shows. 3 of which are currently in production. We have Murder Drones by Liam Vickers, The Amazing Digital Circus by Gooseworks, and The Gaslight District by Nick Zupko. In addition to giving these indie creators an opportunity to direct their own shows, we also strive to share and tell more stories that deserve to be told, with events like live screenings to engage with audience, setting up pop-up stores across Tokyo, Japan, and we hosted Glitch X, our first online panel for indie creators and a platform to promote other indie animations on YouTube. Because we have a saying at Glitch that rising tides lift all ships, and we want to rise the tides. Now, let's jump into the session, cartoon expressions on characters. During this segment, we'll go over a post-mortem of the Murder Drones pilot, where the Murder Drone visor and mouth technology is at now. We'll show some new approaches that we took to create the Amazing Digital Circus, and we'll conclude the segment with a couple general tips on achieving 3D cartoon expressions. Now, let's take a look back at the Murder Drones pilot, and during the next clip, I'd like you guys to take note of the visor and the mouth. So, we were able to get a lot of the expressions for these characters, but as you can see, it's a bit rough around the edges. We had to jump a lot of hurdles and take a lot of shortcuts. You'll notice that the mouth isn't as smooth as we would like it, and the visor doesn't hold up at certain angles. All stuff that we wanted to address in the season proper. So, once the show was pitched to the production team, we started with breaking down the expressions to identify what the characters need to be able to do. Some of the key points for the mouth, they needed to be able to open from ear to ear and create extremely small concave convex shapes, which was a whole challenge for the topology. And it needed to be able to be positioned anywhere on the face so that it could be posed to camera. The eyes needed to have the ability to be hollowed out and act like pupils. The brows and eyelids needed to mask out the eyes when they were overlapping, and not shown in any of these examples, but the eyes needed to be able to swap between different textures like X's, warning signs, typical robot stuff. And in addition, we needed to have emotes that could be overlaid on top of these expressions. So, as we saw, we got there, but at what cost? There are a number of issues that came up during the pilot for all departments. Key issues that came up for the characters were extremely slow performance. For just the face, including the mouth, visor, and teeth, it was over 500 joints per character. Include the rest of the body and accessories, every character was well over 500 joints for one FBX. The joint count and the character setup resulted in Maya and Unreal struggling to have more than a couple of characters on screen at the same time, and we were rarely able to hit the 30 FPS benchmark that we were rendering at. It wasn't until after the pilot we were able to talk to some of the Unreal guys that highly recommended that we keep characters under 200 joints each. We were restricted to low poly models, mostly because of the setup, and with the high joint count being so high, was each vert for the mouth and visor all had controls, just so that we could sculpt it and hit all the needed expressions. And if we wanted to subdivide the mesh, it resulted in more joints with the setup we have, even though we tried multiple skinning approaches, corrective blend shapes, but we could never hit all the expressions without unnecessary unwanted artifacts. And the lower poly count made it difficult for us to make the mouth as smooth as we wanted to. So that leads us to where the motor drone visor and mouth is at now. So after the pilot, all the artists addressed all the difficulties they had in their own department. So we went back to the drawing board to redesign the whole system. So as you can see here, we were able to improve it. The eyes expressions now sit on the visor. They're not like a mesh that's sitting behind a glass container. And the mouths are a lot smoother and better to handle the extreme face shapes that we wanted. So how did we do that? For the visor, we developed a material mask with the ability to animate individual segments of the visor. We use UV math operations to transform and deform any images we gave the material. We were able to set up masking components for the eye when the eyebrow or eyelid overlapped. This was something that required a lot of tweaking by the animators back in the pilot. We built functions to procedurally generate the eyes so that we could have the hollowing out effect for the iris. All of these elements of the material were driven by material parameters and ultimately controlled by imported animation curves from Maya. So animators just had to animate in Maya and it would import onto the material. This did still have its own challenges, like the 16 image cap for materials. This, as well as wanting to keep everything as optimal as possible, we looked at the most common elements the visor used and tied those to the rigs so animators could key those on and off. Any one-off text or gags, we duplicated the materials and let our VFX and MoGraph guys add and do whatever they want for the shot. Our biggest hurdle with the visor was replicating the visuals in Maya. For some reason, the same material logic worked in Maya, but was incredibly slow to evaluate. So we had to opt for creating a mesh proxy of the visor. So instead of swapping textures, we had to swap shape nodes using follicles to get the correct UV details, using a mixture of deformers and dynamic skinning to recreate the UV deformations we have in Maya, in Unreal. It wasn't one-to-one, but it was enough to work with. For the mouth setup, we reviewed when the teeth were, whenever they had sharp teeth, and we were able to condense the 100+ joints we originally had into just 6 blend shapes. Since the transition for the teeth were linear, blend shapes could do the job well and also allowed us to keep under the new 200 joint limit per character. After months of continued trial and error to recreate the mouth shapes as FBX, we ultimately moved to using Olympics just for the mouth. This allowed us to use Maya deformers like lattice, shrink wraps, etc. The basic premise was we would pose the the mouth as like a 2D plane because we wanted 2D style expressions, and then we could wrap that around to the final Murdertron's head shape. And our biggest issue with this, now that we were able to hit the original expressions, naturally we wanted to push it further. Now we were running into limitations in the topology itself. This went through multiple iterations to allow for the two extremes, particularly the small concave convex happy sad expressions. And we also needed to keep the topology consistent so that we could import the alembic as a skeletal mesh rather than a geocache, all again for the sake of optimization and keeping Unreal working as optimal as possible. Since we already had a custom exporter, importer, we were able to add additional steps to these exports, such as adding an extra subdivision level on export to really help smooth out the mouth. We were able to add smoothing operations for specific verts, just to really fine-tune these settings over the time of the production. In addition to that, we added granular controls for visibility to allow the animators to polish the edge flow of the topology. Because of how much they were pushing the mouth shapes, they needed to be able to see if they had edges overlapping, which was causing issues on the Unreal side. Admittedly, this was a time-consuming thing for them to do, but we were able to mitigate it by saving the carefully sculpted poses into our post library to reuse for later. We also made sure that these controls had the ability to slide along the mouth shape so that we could keep the intended mouth shape while allowing the rest of the topology to relax. And though even with all these measures, there were still some cases where the topology just couldn't be smoothed out. In these creases, for those type of creases, we were able to render a mouthless plate of the face, and our post team was able to mask it out. This was only used as a last resort because it was very time consuming for our compositor to mask out these particular creases. Now moving on to the mouth round 3. This is the big bad of the season, and she needed to have the same range as the rest of the characters. But now we were starting from a clean slate with a lot more experience. So we were able to improve the evaluation time by reducing all the previous deformers into just one custom sculpted lattice. And this allowed Maya to evaluate the character over 22 times faster. We finally worked out cleaner topology for smoother results, and it completely removed the need for animators to adjust the shape on a per edge loop base. This setup also allowed the animators to add custom blend shapes to really sculpt poses to the shot, though it's a little bit awkward for the animators to use, admittedly, but it's something we want to improve on in the future. Now, moving on to some of the new challenges that we came across during the Digital Circus. So the Digital Circus has a wide range of characters, all with their own unique challenges, starting from stop motioning doll faces to sentient ribbons. For the doll face, we used a mix of blend shapes and animated opacity parameters. Again, getting the curves, animation curves from Maya and driving materials with that. We used that to be able to reveal and hide the teeth. We did have an issue with animating on 2s and 3s to get that stop motion-y look where we would get ugly motion blur. We were able to get around this by separating the mouth as a separate scale mesh and disabling the motion blur just for the mouth. For a lot of the eyelids, especially for the floating eyeball characters, like the character on the screen left, we utilized the opacity material having the animation drive the opacity from Maya so that it would automatically be hidden whenever the eye was fully opened. For the mask character on the right, they required a lot more range of motion in the eyes and mouth than what the Murder-Drone visors could do. And this would have taken way too long to try and develop a whole material setup for. So instead, we projected skin planes onto the surface of the mask, and disabling the shadows in the material. It allowed us to give the illusion that the black of the mask was a material directly on the mask. And for this shot, we were originally going to go with 2 separate rigs, but we realized we would still need to match the pose during the transition, and the director wanted the ability to do this effect again in any pose later on in the season. So we developed a ribbon rig that could blend between following our uni rig and move independently, while having the ability to have the ends snap and follow each other to make one continuous ribbon. And for this character, while it initially looks similar to the Murder-Drone mouth, he ended up throwing a lot more challenges our way. So again, going down to break this guy's expressions down. For the mouth, it does work similar to the Murder-Drones, but we needed to make some adjustments so that we could take into account the wider range of motion, mainly the mouth being able to go past the edge of the character at any angle, so it looks like it's just his teeth at the bottom, as well as the top of his mouth going above the nose line of a typical character. We tried going with a full FBX approach again, because with Alembic there were still some caveats, and we had to do some workarounds for Murder-Drone. So for Digital Circus, we wanted to go with a full FBX approach, but that ultimately wasn't viable, so we used Alembics for this character's face. For the eyes, they also needed to have the same amount of motion as the mouth, being able to go from concave, convex shapes and anything in between. The pupils needed to be independent of the eye's deformation. We'll go more into detail about that later. And we needed to have face lines that we could toggle on and off, which turned out to be a very cost-effective way to add a lot of expressions for the character. So to get around the pupils not deforming with the eyes, we used decal projections. So this, like I said, allowed us to deform the eye in any way we wanted to while keeping the pupil shape intact. Since we're using a material, we could use UV deformations as needed to add additional effects, kind of like what we did with the Murder-Drone visor. And we were also able to keep other elements, like this character's blushies, in position, regardless of the character's expression. One of the challenges with the decals was making sure that the projection was only projecting onto the eye mesh and not everywhere else. So in order to do that, we had to split the character up into separate scale meshes, so that we could assign unique custom depth stencil values to each scale mesh. And so that we didn't have to assign animation to each scale mesh component in the sequencer, we used the set leader pose component in the construction graph of the character's blueprint. Now we only needed to worry about assigning the animation to the main scale mesh, rather than doing it half a dozen times. Since the decals were separate objects to the scale mesh, the imported animation curves didn't automatically connect to the material, the decals material. So we used a combination of material parameter collections and the set parameter nodes in the event graph to drive the decals materials. So again, animation can just animate in Maya and it'll automatically transfer it to the character in engine. And yeah, so just want to wrap this segment up with a couple general tips on 3D cartoon expressions. Big one. More simple controls, the better. In this case, in particular, we decided to make the eyes of the character limbic so we could scale them up and have the eye look around while maintaining the mesh's deformation. We originally added just an extra level of division to the lattice so animators could make like a curve shapes for any smears or anything like that. And just simple controls on each of the UV light, on the UV points. And our lead animator was able to come up with this. Another good example is just having tweak controls just above every joint with all transforms unlocked. It's really simple to add to the rigs, and it gives us a lot of mileage and unlocks a lot of possibilities. And it's a good example of being able to do more with less. So you don't need like really complex rigging solutions. Sometimes you just need to give the animators a single control and they'll go for it. And you can do a lot with lines. Don't underestimate the value of lines. Lines can exaggerate expressions even further. You can see with the top character, with and without lines, the lines just help push what the character is feeling even more. And then, again, animators can get crazy with it. It's from using eye bag lines as lashes or pulling lines from other character rigs to do similar effects. There's some other really cool examples I can't show right now, but keep an eye out for our next couple of releases to see what I mean over at youtube.com/glitch, shameless plug. And just to summarize this segment, always keep usability in mind. If it's a pain to use, it stifles creativity and you don't get nearly as much from your artists, and your artists don't enjoy it nearly as much. Alembics are good, but use them sparingly. Like really, the power of Unreal does come from like FBX, and especially with Control Rig coming in, there's a lot in the future. We will be able to do a lot more just in engine. But for the time being, Alembics are a good alternative for any of these extreme cases. And finally, look for simple ways to expand your character's range, either from keeping all transforms on a control unlocked, adding single controls wherever you can, and lines are really simple to set up, literally 2 joints. You can twist them around and get any shape you want, and they're very effective at pushing the expressions. I'm going to hand it over to Armin.
Ooh, okay, there we go. Awesome, thanks, Mark. Really, really good summary of doing the cool stuff, making animators do the cool stuff so that we can get the shots out the door. So jumping from the beginning of the pipeline to the end, we've got general, I guess, introduction to lighting, rendering, and QA. Otherwise, workflows for getting shots out the door. I'm going to be going through a number of things, but regardless of what topic I go through, I want to keep these 3 points in mind. Namely, how do you align creatively with a director, minimizing scope creep and locking decisions, as well as being fast, collaborative, and iterative. I'm curious to know who we've got in the room. Would you raise your hand if you're a client-based project, so if you do service work? Cool, so we've got a few here. And raise your hand if you work in your own original IP. Cool, so a bit of a mix. Even though all of our projects we work on are original IP, we like to kind of think of them as, cool, the director is the client, we'll get them the show that we kind of want, and ultimately giving them the creative vision for us to kind of execute. And with that, there's always that relationship of time and budget. And also, whenever I mention budget from now on, I'm talking about time budget, which is the main consideration we have when we have budget. So speaking to the challenges that we have with lighting, we've got multiple shows. So right now we're currently working on 3. We've got a huge variety of styles, from cartoony 90s style aesthetic to dramatic, even cinematic, Furiosa kind of style things. And we have often like 400 shots per episode, as well as a strict kind of timeline. In terms of our byline, the byline is always, it's ready when it's ready. We'll upload it when we know that it's the best project. But we have had a pretty good track record of getting these episodes out, 2 to 3 months in between, which for a lot of projects is pretty speedy. And again, some of the shots you can consider a good variety of it. On the top left, you can see, we've got shots where we've got VFX, interactive fog. We've got, giant black holes in the background, which contribute to lighting and effects and everything in between. We've got shots with particles. We've got flashlights. We've got glowing visors. We've got other shots like the bottom two where they're incredibly dramatic in their own way, with very specific lighting styles. But how do you, with 400 shots in the show, how do you actually get closer to getting all these shots out the door? So something we employed very recently, just last year, is something called the temp master final process. And this is a good way that we align creatively the director and lock decisions as we go along. So a little bit more of what that looks like. So the temp lighting refers to rendering early. Seeing things with the engines helps the whole production process. The master lighting is allowing us to make big creative decisions and form a technical framework for our show. And the final lighting is refining every single shot as guided by the previous decisions. And so what's the actual benefit of this process? Which I'll go into detail. Before that, here's a bit of an example of what that looks like visually. So temp lighting, you can see it's really just, let's get it in engine. Render it so that the rest of the people can do their work. Master lighting is often a budget about 1 or 2 days. So we try to budget 1 or 2 days, depending on the show, depending on the style. It could be longer. But it's all about, per shot, by the way, it's all about trying to finalize those big creative decisions. And this is where us and the director really try to align on the creative framework. And then final lighting is applying that to each shot, which is easier said than done. With particular shows, you might get it for free. You might get the entire sequence for free. But one like this is we had a lot of characters flying in. We had rocket ships. We had explosions. So there is still a lot of nuances per shot which you need to consider. Here's another example of the temp, master, and final lighting process. This isn't a good example of when the process works well, you actually can get a lot of shots for free. So we had temp lighting, which was, again, just getting it out the door, master lighting, creative alignment, and final lighting. And for this particular sequence, there was very little we had to do per sequence. Once the master lighting was good, there was just the rim lights which you need to put per character. And other than that, the lighting stayed majority the same for the sequence, which was a really big win for us. So temp lighting, a bit more detail into that. So what that looks like is, you can see in the image before, is we have a blueprint that can be added as a spawnable. We can add this per shot if we needed to, or generally we add it per sequence, just so we can get things rendered. It's really just a spotlight parented to the camera. And you can see we've got a blueprint set up where you can just drag it into the scene, it spawns to the scene, and it'll follow the camera. We even have controls where if there's multiple cameras in the shot, we can adjust it so depending on which camera we want it to have. This allows us to render early, and the rest of the team can get started with their fixes. We do a lot of parallel working, and we have a structure that allows us to work incredibly fast and dynamically in parallel. So the moment we get these renders out, the animation team can check if their animation works correctly. The VFX team can get started. We can find out if there's skinning issues, if there's set dressing issues. The whole team can just get ready, and we can have this rendering with materials as well. We did try other approaches where we just had unlit things with AO, but we found this was a simpler solution, but it also allowed us to actually see materials and things in real time. And this is often done at the layout or animation stage, depending on how early we can get things in engine. But the moment we've got an entire sequence set up, we start rendering, and temp lighting allows us to do that. So it comes to the master lighting, which is, arguably sometimes the most fun part of the process. So we select a range of shots that reflect the signature lighting scenarios across the entire episode. We focus attentions on tasks with high impact. So what are the least things that we can do to make the biggest impact? And you can always balance, it's a bit of a balancing act. You're like, cool, we don't have too many that we're investing so much time here, but we don't want to pick too little that it actually doesn't represent the episode holistically. It can provide a good scope in the episode. Let's say you jump in, you're like, cool, we've got 70 different lighting scenarios. This is definitely out of scope. This is something we need to kind of figure out. 10 to 13 masters for us in our budget is a pretty safe range. But if there's scenarios where it's more than that, we're like, cool, okay, there's a lot we need to work out, and we need to align to kind of figure that out and be like, why? Can we kind of pull back in different areas? More into lighting masters is we select the master. So I would go in, we'd select different masters, and then I'd launch with the director. And this is a big part of where the alignment process starts, is we're quite largely separate, and then now with the director's like, this is what I think we should do with each of the scenarios. Then once we actually work and approve them, that locks it creatively. There's no scenario where the director will come back and be like, actually, for this master shot, could we do this? That's something that's agreed and set up expectations with the director, but it also allows us to feel safe with our estimations. Making creative changes down the line, of course, anyone who's worked in any kind of linear kind of content has massive repercussions later on. So there's a good agreement of making decisions. And it doesn't feel intrusive to the director either, because you made a series of yeses and yeses. If you say yes, 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 and then there's a no, you'd be like, cool, where'd that no come from? Like, were any of the previous things wrong? And it'd say, oh, I want to do it like this. You'd be like, this is what we agreed on before. This was our earlier yes. And that becomes a lot easier of a conversation later on. So it allows us to lock creative decisions, and I think that's a big important one for budget. And also structurally, we can get some shots for free, provided we set up the lighting levels and shot masters, which I'll go into a bit later with our structure of how we structure shots. Another good tip for just some tools that are used for master lighting, Shot Deck. If you're not using Shot Deck, I definitely recommend it. I'm not sponsored by them, I just love them. All it is it's a library of screenshots across a whole selection of film that they've been able to license. And it's essentially a Google search for high quality film shots. They categorize them by color palettes, by what lenses they use. They've got great examples of animation from film. I love launching the directors with this because you can be like, cool, just like this, Tarantino did this. And we can actually, the work's been done for you. As much as you like to believe you're creative and everything, we get inspirations from certain films. So this is a great launching and director's tool. And another one is PureRef. PureRef, it's very straightforward. It's really just an infinite canvas where we can paste different images and just do a lot of notes. And I love this for being able to kind of see all the masters in one place and then be like, cool, I can remove this, I can add this. Both just really handy management tools. And final, lighting. So here is where most of the budget admittedly goes to, because now you're not working on 10 to 15 shots, you're working on 400 shots, right? But those creative decisions you made before should really help you make decisions later on. So most of the budget, understandably, goes to this. Each sequence is then graded and allocated at a time. So we say, cool, we've got this many sequences, these are the challenges, this is how many of them differ to the master, and we're able to actually predict how things are managed and how we can actually budget for each of the sequences. We do a grading system of like A, B, C, A+, B+, A-, and this kind of really, really helps us get ahead on the scope of the episode, because we have our own internal deadlines which we want to hit at no compromise. And then, so this is just lighting shot to shot, and it's informed very closely by the master. So you can see a visual example here. The master shots at the top, which is the actual master shots we had for the episode. We spent a good amount of time with the director to approve those shots, and then it was just a matter of matching those things to the rest of it. And some examples, for example, the castle, actually structurally setting it up, we were able to have those lights across all the sequences without having to add a lot of things manually. And even things like smoke, lighting direction, moonlight, those things we could have across the entire episode. So general things for QA. I think this is a really important part, something that really just matters us to the most, because it's not done until it's done, and it's not done until the director says it's done. So understand the nuances of your director's QA. Is this a technical fix or is this a creative fix? And if it is creative, ask how can we get to a creative alignment? Generally, I like to think of a rule of 3. Like some things are just more complex, but if you can internally try to get to just 3 kind of rounds of creative QA by making smart decisions of, cool, here's one broad stroke, are we far or close? Here's another broad stroke, are we far or close? And if it has more than 3, you'll be like, why? Like, what are we not getting? Like, let's have a conversation. Do we have a workshop? Like, how our minds aren't aligned in this. And sometimes you just need a workshop with the director, and that's honestly one of the beauties of Unreal Engine. Having worked in offline renders before, if I had a producer or director breathing down my neck, it would actually worst thing. You'd press render, wait 1 minute, and then be like, is that right? And I'm like, no, and then just keep doing that. But with Unreal Engine, it's like a workshop. It's like a play box. It's fun again. And you're actually able to like drag lights in, adjust colors, even VFX, even adjust the colors of VFX and smoke and clouds in real time. And then we can just like lock down masters or shots really, really quickly. And I've done this several times, and don't be afraid to do that with your client. Of course, set the expectations up. And yeah, I guess that's the next point. I wrote that down. Set up expectations with your director and be clear about how much time you have left, because there are some times when it gets to the wire, be like, do we really need that? Like, these are the things we said before. We're pretty close, and may come up with those expectations. And trust your gut. If it feels like there'll be trouble, there's going to be trouble. Like, always have a slight paranoia when it comes to your deadlines, and try to really stick to your scope. And get to those things early as well. Trust your resources. For this project, the lighting artists are just myself and one other artist. Shout out to Selena, who's an amazing artist who does a lot of the work. But me and Selena are often the artists, getting through these shots, often working at, I think, 5 episodes at one time. At post, usually it's at 2 episodes in lighting, but across an entire studio, there'd be sometimes 5 episodes at a time. Structure of a sequence. Maximize collaboration and minimize repetition. So here, if you were in some other talks, this might look quite familiar. There's the linear pipeline communities are going strong, and we're finding a lot of the same solutions. But it all starts with the shot master. So the shot master is separated into a level sequence per map. So this is an example of sequence 5, and we have 3 shot masters in here, meaning we have 3 different maps. So here we've got our naming, so we've got our episodes, we've got our sequence, and then we got which shot is the first shot in that. So it starts with our shot master. Inside our shot master is kind of like our editor as well. We've got all our shots in the sequence lined up as they were, matching the time codes of the animatic. And here we'll have all of our subsequences. So each of these subsequences, we find we're always adding and removing subsequences, so there's no redundancy. But this allows the artist to work incredibly collaboratively. Another thing we sometimes have is console variables. If there's some render settings that we want to have for specific sequences, we hide and add different levels, like certain characters or certain aspects of the map that we want to add or remove, and all of our subsequences as well as the audio. So we have one for effects, we have one for lighting, we have one for environments. This is set dressing. We've also got one for comp, because it's very common for our comp artists to come in and be like, I just want to green screen this thing, or I've got some UI elements that I want to add onto these screens. So motion graphics is done by a comp artist. We've also got hidden actors where we want something to be in a level, but not for this subsequence. So we can just hide them here. And then we also have crowd. So we've got a crowd artist who will do various crowd-related things. And we have the shots. So the shots here are generally what hold the animation data, and they are just something that the animators themselves can jump in and play with, import, export, and just keep all the FBX and animation data. Cool. Moving on, we've got shot subsequences. So if you imagine if we double-clicked into one of those shot subsequences, here's an example of lighting, we have even more stuff here. So lighting has added all these spawnables for this shot master, and they've also added a bunch, and what we have is a tool that sets this up per shot. So actually, in that subsequences, we have more shot subsequences. This allows us to add spawnables on a per shot basis. So if you don't want to affect the entire shot master, you can jump into those shot sequences and just add different effects. And this can be added on demand with a tool that was built for any shot sequence, whether it's effects. Effects and lighting are the ones who get the most advantage of it, environments as well. And then we also have the levels. No screenshot here, but you can just imagine. If you have a level, you can add sub-levels into that level. And there are certain things that we do with that is, we'll have a lighting level, we'll have an actors level, and we'll have, generally something set dressing levels. It allows us to key on and off the spawnability of that of those levels, just as we need it. So yeah, allows storing universal actors across the level, so we can put that sub-level into multiple levels to have that same kind of data. We can key to visibility easily, as you saw on the previous slide. We turned off the actors for that, certain actors for that subsequence. And easy debugging of performance. If there's optimizations that we need, we can easily turn off entire levels, turn off all the actors, turn off all the lighting to kind of figure out where we're getting at. And for version control, we've got Perforce, which is what Unreal and Epic recommends. It allows easy storing of universal actors. Cool, ignore that one thing. But Perforce is what we use for version control and allows us to actually maintain data across the entire company. Cool. So I'm very obsessed with budget, being a lead, so I thought a bit information on project management and review. And I did have some questions. This was actually a good topic last year, which I was keen on talking with a lot of people about. Before management, we have this ecosystem of Asana, Gyazo, and SyncSketch. So what we have is Asana is our main management tool, and we organize every single thing that needs to be done for a shot. This is the lifeblood of the company. Every task, every department, all their tasks are assigned here. So how do we get reviews, and how do you get reviews efficiently and quickly? Gyazo has been an awesome tool. I haven't seen too many people use this, but what it allows you to do is quickly take a screenshot of a GIF, and it automatically uploads it to a database, and it'll automatically give you a link. So what that allows us to do is you don't need to render everything to kind of and get that reviewed for the director or even the leads. Sometimes you're just like, hey, remove this object. You're like, cool. Gyazo, screenshot it, cool, there it is, and that can get to approval. So that's been a really, really fast and efficient way that a lot of our artists have to, I guess, do and assess. For render reviews, we actually render out sequences and we upload them to Sync Sketch, where we'll have our proper directorial reviews, and they'll be able to come back and review that properly. And artists are generally really good of identifying, should we use Gyazo? Can I just get a GIF approved, or do I need to render something? So that's really up to the artist's liberty to actually know what you need to get to final approval. But that's been a really, really good system for us to get things out the door. Deadline for Unreal, use it. This was one of the most impactful introductions to our pipeline last year. Unreal, I guess AWS runs Deadline, and they most recently released Deadline for Unreal Engine. We were able to get an early use on it, and it's been fantastic. If any of you have used the movie render queue, it's fantastic, but it's, you have to babysit the renders. If you've got crashes, you lose all your shots. There's a lot of challenges that just weren't accounted for linear, but Deadline for Unreal is fantastic. We can render out an episode, forget about it. We can even have postscripts and prescripts, which we haven't taken full advantage of, but that's something definitely recommend, and it's something we should use. We're currently using local nodes, so we're all rendering things in-house. We've got a bunch of workstations and machines, both for artists and for rendering, and we've been able to manage that. But we are exploring transitions to Deadline Cloud, which is becoming incredibly relevant for our international team. Being able to render from their own machines with our local nodes will be fantastic to use. International considerations on that topic of having a large team. How to sync render data across the country, and how do we have render version control? So we have a comp artist in one state, and we have all the renders in another state. How do you sync hundreds of gigabytes of data across the state? And honestly, truthfully, what our internet's like. It was faster for us sometimes to actually put it on a hard drive and fly to another state to get all those renders out. So that's not something we want to do. Luckily, we've been able to set up a local network, and just using their own sync data, we use Synology Sync. The moment we have a render out, it dynamically syncs with the cloud, and then that automatically downloads on our comp artist computer. So there's literally a situation the comp artist will be working on a shot, and then bang, the new plate will just be updated without thinking about it. So these are small considerations, they seem like, but they've saved us days and days of transfer data that we previously would have considered. Render version control. At the moment, we've got just the file structure, version V1, V2, having different renders, and custom organized tools that we use to organize the data. And if you've got questions, you let me know more details. Let you know more details about that. Cool. And a couple of case studies to finish off of just some specific examples which I thought were interesting. Hope you find it too. Of challenges that we had before. The first one was AO, ambient occlusion. So Lumen is amazing. It's a really credible lighting tool, and it's really realistic results. But the AO still doesn't, while it is realistic, might not meet stylized requirements. And SSAO is disabled by default, or we weren't able to get it working correctly. So we built we built a blueprint that allows us to activate these certain CVARs, which console variables, which will allow us to activate the screen-based ambient occlusion, to have SSAO activated with Lumen, and we package it into a BP that we can add it per sequence and also adjust the AO per shot. So that's been a really, really good stylistic example, especially with this very flat-lit show. It really, really helped our style. The next one is render passes, which I understand is completely redundant now that we have 5.4 come out. We've been asking about it for a while, which is great, but I thought it's interesting. This is how we did it. So nesting the shot masters with modifiers in each sequence. Here's an example from one of our upcoming shows, the Gaslight District. We really had a lot of comp-heavy stuff we wanted to do, so separating the background, characters, and certain effect element was really important for us to get